This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review. I'm your host, Gilad Halpern. Every week we bring you conversations with authors about the books and research and other things that we like. And if you like us, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter by going to our homepage. That's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review. Scroll down to the bottom and click the big red button that says Patreon. Click and support us. Some of you have been doing this for months and years, and we simply cannot thank you enough. This episode is produced in partnership with the Elizabeth and Tony Komper Center for the Study of Anti-Semitism and Racism at the University of Haifa. My guests today are two fellows of the Komper Center, who happen to be Israeli scholars based in Canada, Dr. Dikla Yogev, a sociologist at the University of Toronto, and Dr. Shlomi Balaban, currently a postdoctoral fellow in law at the University of Ottawa, and soon an assistant professor at Sapir College in the Gaza Envelope district in the south of Israel. Hello to you both.
Hello.
Hello.
So what emerges from your writing on the topic is that October the 7th was in many ways a watershed in how anti-Semitism is manifested and experienced abroad, specifically in Canada, which is the arena that you know best. Can you explain how? Dikla, let's start with you.
So I would start with October 8th in Canada. And I keep saying October 8th because this was the actual case. We woke up in October 7th to the horrific horrors that happened in Israel. And before we even realized what's going on and how many people were kidnapped, how many were killed, we had to immediately cope with huge hatred against us. In the street, on campus, anywhere you can, imagine, schools, hospitals. It happened quite fast. So we didn't even know where it comes from. It was before IDF started their operation in Gaza. So it wasn't necessarily linked to Israel's operations. And immediately hate skyrocketed, and now we have statistics that talk about 700% increase in hate crimes against Jews in Canada.
On that day? Since that day?
Since that day.
How did it manifest itself? All this new expressions of hate. How in real terms, how was it different from October the 6th?
Yeah, so it's hard to differentiate the personal experience from our work, which is more like scholarly. But let's say in the years before October 7th, speaking Hebrew in downtown Toronto wasn't an issue. Or going with any Jewish symbol, wearing any Jewish symbol was simply not an issue. And afterwards, quite quickly, it became very problematic.
Problematic how? Were people accosted on the street? Were they bullied, shouted at? What was really the nature of this hatred?
Yes, so all of the above. So it starts from, it's mainly verbal, but we also see for sure physical appearances, we see shootings to synagogues when people are not there. They're not present, but they still shoot into the synagogue. They shoot into Jewish day schools. There was a school bus that was burned. So you get a feeling that you are not safe. So, and that's why when I say that it's very hard to differentiate between the personal experience and my work, because I personally feel less safe. I personally prefer to kind of think or debate with myself when I should speak in Hebrew or not. And if it's okay to show that I'm Israeli or not. So I do know that other people feel the same or even worse because they were exposed to additional hate, behaviors.
Shlomi, is your experience similar to the class?
So, in a sense, but not really. Our background is different. Dikla has been living in Canada for years. I came from Israel with my family. It was mid-August 2023, a few weeks before October 7th. And as you mentioned, I came to be a postdoctoral fellow here at the law faculty at the University of Ottawa. And I should also say that Dikla mentioned October 7th, the actual day. We woke up on October 7th, Saturday, and since I've been working at Sapir College, which is 2 miles from the Gaza Strip, everything was really vivid as a member of the WhatsApp groups of Sapir College. So not going to too much details, but I personally lost colleagues of mine in real time, experiencing it through the WhatsApp groups of Sapir College. Maybe I should also mention the names, Cindy Flash and her husband, and Minzor and her husband and 2 of her children.
As well as many of your students. I mean, I don't know about killed, but...
Not my own students, but yeah, Sapir College lost, if we look at Sapir College as a community, which we do, approximately 40 people. Yeah.
But back to Canada, do you feel that on the 7th of October was really a watershed in the same way that Dikla was saying?
So the reason is, I mentioned it, I don't know what was before October 7th because I was only for a few weeks. But I can tell you that being a part of the faculty that has many Jewish students certainly was a truly devastating experience. Students had been subjected to anti-Semitism, blunt anti-Semitism, and I'm not trying to think of the situation as a mild situation, but swastika at the dorms, but at the same time being shouted at class by your colleagues, other students, all kind of horrific experiences that I was exposed to because I myself did not feel anti-Semitism, but I was exposed to other students' own experiences, and that I have to say quite shocked me.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting point that I'd like you to comment on. Do you feel that there's a difference in the experiences of Canadian Jews and Israeli expats in Canada in the way they are treated and the way that they are perceived, these expressions of anti-Semitism? Shlomi?
Definitely. And for a scholar to say definitely, it's supposed to be quite a rare experience.
It means that there is clear-cut evidence.
I can tell you that I've been talking to Jewish Canadians for the last 2 years, and they're experiencing this period of time as the worst that they can remember. Like Dikla mentioned, by the way, not wearing a yarmulke when they walk down the street or to synagogue, afraid of speaking or mentioning Israel or Hebrew during conversations. And at the same time, when I talk with my friends from the Israeli community, they haven't seemed to notice all those clear anti-Semitism signs. It feels like there is a huge difference. And I'll tell you another thing. A few days after October 7th, I attended with 2 of my children the Ottawa Solway JCC had then Prime Minister Trudeau and the head of the opposition, Yogev, as guests as part of a rally And one of the things I noticed that when speakers, the two distinguished speakers, talked about October 7th, the term pogrom was mentioned. And in Israel, it seems to me that they use Holocaust rather than pogroms. Okay, that's like one of the things that I've noticed. But at the same time, there is a huge increase in anti-Semitic incidents, as we know, and it seems that there's also a gap in the perception of those incidents by Israelis and by the Jewish community.
What are these gaps?
I think that the Israelis are not intimidated by anti-Semitic signs because many of the times, unless it's a swastika or something that is really blunt, they don't recognize it's an anti-Semitic sign. So, for example, next to my kids' school, there was a red triangle sign. If you ask a Canadian Jew what does it mean, he will know that it means that the place is a target. Israelis I talked about didn't even notice it or didn't even know what I was talking about. Okay? That's another sign. And they are not, it's looked like Israelis are not really anxious when they talk about anti-Semitic incidents. I have no idea why.
Dikla, is it your perception as well that it's mainly Jewish Canadian problem more than an Israeli Canadian problem?
Not necessarily. So I see it from another angle, and it's my research. The research that I did, I collected information on campus with colleagues on campus, and then later on workplaces. And what we saw is that generally Israelis are more anxious than others. Maybe they don't show it, maybe they don't realize it, maybe they try to fit in. Maybe it's another thing that, as an immigrant or as someone who is not in their own country, you try not to, get attention, the unwanted attention. So I think that's probably connects to Shlomi's point about Israelis not wanting to talk about it or recognize it, but on the other hand, we do see Israelis as those who take the lead to act, especially on campus. So if we talk about campus activists and people who are doing stuff on campus to fight anti-Semitism, you will always find an Israeli in the leaders. You will always find someone who somehow cannot stand the situation, cannot stand the hatred and what's going on, and will work with the local Jews, to promote our interest or to explain what's going on or to find responses and resources for the community. So I also think that another difference between the local Jews, American or Canadians, versus Israelis is that they got really shocked by their friends. I never considered Canadians as my friends because I'm not. I'm different. So I wasn't shocked that my best friend hates Israel and hates me because I didn't have it.
You didn't have that best friend.
Exactly. But Canadian Jews pre-October 7th and American Jews pre-October 7th were much more similar to non-Jews. And they had friends and culture and history and food and family and whatnot that is much more similar to the local community than to Israelis. And for them, October 7th was a shock. And they are still shocked now by their friends that basically were just abandoned them. I felt so sorry for the local Jews for that. Because I kind of expected people to hate me. So I didn't feel it before. It wasn't as prevalent. I felt comfortable, but I wasn't their. They were not my friends, and so I didn't have this, shock. Whereas the local Jews are still shocked, and I think that it really connected they connected both communities that before October 7th were
the Jewish Canadian and the
Yes,
Israeli communities.
correct,
Mhm.
and also it's also the same thing in America.
Mhm. I want to go back to something that you said earlier in the conversation, Dikla. In the more flagrant cases of anti-Semitic attacks, like firing on a synagogue or setting a school bus ablaze, I mean, other than being a hate crime, it is a crime. I mean, there's laws against it and punishable laws. And I want to ask you about the authorities' responses. How adequate they've been in those very flagrant cases, but more interestingly, in the grey area of things that are perhaps not so flagrantly a criminal offense, but something that there is some room for intervention.
Yes, generally, I don't think there is an adequate response. So, but now I will kind of take a step back and I will explain. So, looking at my area, Greater Toronto area, Toronto police is considered very good in terms of the Jewish community. So they are supportive. At the beginning of the war, there were like police stations, like almost permanent kind of like portable police stations on the neighborhoods, so you could just walk there and tell them what's going on, or just draw their attention to things that you feel uncomfortable with. And there were many rallies that were going from downtown into Jewish neighborhoods, specifically targeting Jewish neighborhoods with like tons of people and shouting and speakers and from the river to the sea. And they were just, going in the neighborhood. And people were really worried about it. So I think that in terms of Toronto police services, the response is better than other forces.
Which is what, not allowing violent protesters to approach.
They did allow,
Mhm.
but they gave a feeling that they care about it, and they were there, and they were present, and they didn't allow it to escalate, which was a very good thing. And they were trying to kind of keep it downtown and not to, have them spread into the neighborhoods, which at the beginning wasn't as successful. With time, they became more successful. I But in terms of the federal authorities, so I don't want to be like, I don't have a clear explanation. But for example, the person who set the bus on fire and the people that were shooting on schools, and there was someone who actually targeted leaders in the community and clearly threatened to kill them. So I read that he was sentenced to 60 days of house arrest, which is irrelevant to the hate crimes that he was. So there is a feeling that it's not adequately taken care of. And as Jews, we don't feel safe. I can say that, like, I can speak for the community. We don't feel safe. But still, if we look, more locally, there are forces that are better than others.
Mm-hmm. Shlomi, you are a legal scholar, and part of your research has been into the implementation or perhaps adoption or legislation, you tell me, of the parameters of the definition of anti-Semitism that was stipulated by the International Holocaust Remembrance Association, IHRA. Can you tell us to what extent that has been a useful tool?
Well, I should mention that my research deals with it's a comparative research that deals with the U.S., Canada, and the UK. And the idea behind it is to look at the regulation that was manifested in the context of IRA, which you just mentioned. The Canadian approach is more of a soft law approach. There is a Canadian handbook that was published a few months ago. There is no federal law that deals with IRA, but there is an effort not to use IRA as a tool for education, to deal with anti-Semitism, but it's not legally binding.
So is that handbook is just a list of recommendations?
The handbook deals with list of recommendations. It explains what is IRA, what is anti-Semitism, and so on.
And it encourages people to follow it, but it's not, as you say, it's not.
And not only people but institutions. For example, after October 7th, a new position was created at the University of Ottawa, and now there is a position that deals with fighting anti-Semitism on campus.
And it wasn't legislated because of this, what do you say, the culture of the legal culture
Definitely.
in Canada that doesn't
Exactly,
but not because that definition was deemed inadequate.
No.
Or maybe both.
Okay. The definition was accepted by the government of Canada. It was accepted by the government of the UK and so on. When we compare it to the US, it seems like the US is in sort of there is an effort to make it legally binding. There was a presidential effort, I think it was 2019, by President Trump during his first term. Though IRA was sort of adopted into Title VI, which means, I don't want to go into too legalistic terms, but it's not binding, but it's sort of something that institutions should look into when they talk about Title VI and discrimination and so on. The Canadian deal with it in a different manner. What will be the consequences? It's too early to say.
So you can't say whether it's more effective or less.
I don't
yet.
Not at this point. I can say, by the way, following on your last question to Dikla, when we talk about violence on anti-Semitic acts, a few weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken, the National Holocaust Monument in Ottawa was defaced. Graffiti was written all over it. And apparently that the man that did that was a City of Ottawa lawyer, or should I say a former City of Ottawa lawyer.
He was fired because of that incident?
Yes. And I think, there's a lot of talk about what's the difference between being anti-Israel or being anti-Semitic, if it's the same or not. It's also relevant in the context of the IRA definition, by the way, that also deals with act against Israel. But it should be mentioned that defacing the National Holocaust Monument is the most anti-Semitic act you can think of. And again, it's also not just in the Jewish context, on the anti-Semitic context. This is the Canadian National Holocaust Monument.
Yeah, but again, I want to go back to the question of the response of the authorities.
So,
but if that man was fired from his public job,
he was arrested
and
he was fired.
He was arrested and prosecuted.
Yeah, he was released on bail, and he's supposed to be sentenced at a later date.
So I would find that response adequate, wouldn't you?
I do. And at the same time, I'm thinking of his act. I mean, getting to the National Monument and to do what he did. You talked about October 7th as a sort of a watershed, right?
So you're saying it would never happen before?
I don't think so. I think that's another example. And we're talking about a man of law, a lawyer, right? So yeah,
No, not anymore.
I think I found it to be an horrendous act.
Dikla, in your research, do you have any comparative data about Canada and America? Not just in this in that narrow sense that Shlomi was talking about, the definition and what is the letter of the law, but more broadly.
Yes. So my studies are focused on experiences, like what people experience before October 7th, after October 7th, and now. So we have 3 time points. So the first study, we collected data around December 2023, which was quite close to October 7th. So the time frame of now was very close to October 7th. So we asked people before, right after, and now. The second study that was focused on workplaces, data was collected around September 2024. So before October 7th, after, and now was September. But still, what we saw is a huge increase in anything that you can think of. So we asked people, how comfortable do you feel doing these daily things? Going out of your house, walking on the street, working on campus, wearing your kippah, speaking Hebrew on the street. So we see that before October 7th, everyone felt quite normal. So they felt comfortable or very comfortable doing it. Then you have immediately after October 7th, in which people felt really uncomfortable. Some people didn't want to leave the house, didn't want to leave the dorms, didn't feel comfortable traveling in a plane, like things that you don't even, that don't connect directly, but, signify an experience that people, fear and victimized. And then now, like in the time period of now, we see a slight decrease in these behaviors, but still it's very high in terms of the feeling of, being uncomfortable and doing these things. And when we ask people about experiences of anti-Semitism, which we didn't develop based on definitions, we developed them based on what people experienced. So at the beginning, we just basically asked people, so what is anti-Semitism for you? What would you consider anti-Semitic? So, for example, rallies against Israel, emails against Israel, discussions in meetings in the workplace, lecturer on campus, on class that is making comments, and this kind of stuff. So again, it was almost not prevalent before October 7th, rose significantly after, and is relatively stable now. So we talk about a very long experience, and it doesn't seem to rest or something like that. So I think October 7th was and still a huge problematic experience for both Israelis and local Jews in both Canada and America. We didn't see major differences between Canada and America. We didn't see major differences when we talked to in the first study, when we looked into faculty, student stuff. We didn't see differences. We didn't see differences in age. We didn't see differences in gender. So it's basically a very broad experience that pretty much everyone experiences the same. And when we talked about, when we look at workplaces versus campus, in campus everything is more problematic than workplaces. But generally, there is a huge increase in both.
Why is it so different between campuses and just normal workplaces? My
explanation is that campus has some attributes that allow or even facilitate these behaviors. So you have faculty that are tenured. There is free speech. There are very many, young people who kind of still shape their worldview. So you have this context in which this behavior can proliferate very easily versus workplaces that are more, let's say, self-regulated or even more regulated. You would not expect people to block the entrance to the library in a workplace, but it happened on campus many times, or encampments happened in tens of campuses, but didn't happen on workplaces.
Is that because protest is perhaps more tolerated on campuses?
Absolutely, but also generally, I wouldn't say anarchism, but not taking authority too seriously is much more easily done on campus versus workplaces.
Yeah, we are getting closer to the end, so I would just ask you, the two of you, the same question to wrap up with. And we'll start with you, Shlomi. I'd like to know whether you have any rule of thumb as to how to effectively differentiate between what you see as legitimate criticism of Israel and what could easily spill over to anti-Semitic rhetoric.
So first of all, being critical of Israel from, let's say, what is a legitimate criticism of Israel, I should say that as an Israeli citizen, I'm also critical of the Israeli government. And I don't think that if someone knows Israelis, they know that they're always critical, right? That's one of their, that's one of the things that Israelis do at the time, they're critical. The thing is to apply your critique of Israel on someone that has nothing to do with the Israeli government, or expecting someone that because he is Jewish is supposed to take responsibility for all kinds of acts done by the Israeli government, whether you agree to or not. That's I think that is the main thing. But we could there's also always like another layer. When you talk about criticizing Israel, again, which generally speaking is obviously fine. You can also criticize Canada, but at the same time, there are always there are sometimes signs of anti-Semitic roots of that criticism, and you can be critical of Israel, but again, if anti-Semitic roots are noticed, you're not being anti-Israel. You're just being anti-Semitic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It means that there are things that are pretty easily understood as bigoted and racist.
Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Dikla, what's your take on it?
Yeah, I would agree with Shlomi about targeting Israelis for Israel. I think that's not something that I would accept. So the fact that I'm Israeli should not be anything in this game, and it is. I'm targeted because I'm Israeli. I'm targeted for Israel because I'm Israeli. I'm not allowed to be Israeli. That shouldn't happen. So even people who are trying kind of hide their criticism or their anti-Semitism and are critical of Israel, eventually they are critical of our own existence, like my own legitimacy of being, there. So I think that's where it becomes really problematic.
There being in Canada?
Just generally. Exist.
Mm-hmm.
But again, talking about campuses and the last point, I think that is something that I saw during the encampment, the University of Ottawa, all the river to the sea signs that delegitimize the existence of Israel. And I should also mention that during that period of time, during the encampment period, many of the Jewish students were simply afraid to not just walk near the encampment, but in campus. Adding to that, I do want to mention that after October 7th, the Jewish community was shocked, probably still is shocked. But for Jewish students being away from home, maybe during the first year in the university and so on, it was, for many of them, it was even a greater shock. And during that period of time, my own supervisor, my own postdoctoral supervisor, Professor Adam Dodek, together with Professor Michael Geist, both of them of the law faculty, organized meetings of the Jewish students. And that was quite an interesting experience that allowed me, first of all, to hear what is experienced by students, all the anti-Semitic, or the anti-Semitic, blunt anti-Semitic actions toward them. But it also formed sort of a community which I'm not sure that existed before October 7th. We had a few meetings, and each time there were more students that attended. And I should also mention that although I only arrived in Canada during August 2023, after October 7th, I received support from a lot of my new colleagues in light of the catastrophe that happened on October 7th. And that's
So it was a watershed in several directions.
Yes, and I think that's if we, to conclude that is also a positive note.
No, but I have one more point that comes out of what you two have just said.
Yeah.
As you, Dikla, just said that much of that anti-Semitic or just bigoted rhetoric denies your existence as an Israeli. And then you, Shlomi, said that Jewish students, so I assume there were Canadian Jewish students, were afraid to walk around the encampments where it was said the chants were from the river to the sea. So basically, on the surface, it shouldn't matter to them because they're not Israelis, so it's not their identity that is being dismissed and neglected. But there's something more to it here, after all.
That's the exact point.
Mm-hmm.
The exact point that we are trying to make. The exact point is that there is no anti-Israel thing. It's anti-Semitism, pure and simple. You cannot differentiate really between anti-Israel and anti-Semitism. It's the same thing. Eventually, it goes, and that's why the Holocaust Memorial was targeted, and that's why a Jewish day school is targeted, and that's why Jews that are dressed like, traditionally are targeted, because it's anti-Semitism. There is nothing. We don't agree. Shlomi, correct me if I'm wrong. I think you agree with me that anti-Israel is not a thing. It's anti-Semitism, and it's very clear. So eventually, everything comes to this point, and that I think that's the exact thing that we are trying to fight.
I agree with you when the criticism is illegitimate, obviously, but I do think that we should also look at it from another perspective, which is the Jewish community perspective. From my own experience, the Canadian Jewish community is really tied in its soul to Israel, and Israel is part of the Jewish community identity. After October 7th, many of these Jewish community in Ottawa raised funds and gave donations and went to Israel to support, and so on. So in that sense, Israel is part of the identity of the Jewish community.
All right. Dr. Dikla Yogev, Dr. Shlomi Balaban, thank you very much for joining us today. And also many thanks to Itai Shelem, the manager of TLV1 Studios, and to the Compra Center for their generous support. And now we've got a request, because most of you listen to us on the Apple Podcasts app, and we would like to ask you to please consider writing us a review. You too can support us by going to our website and subscribing onto our Patreon campaign. Check out our archive. It has more than 1,000 interviews by now. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and now on Blue Sky as well. But most important, join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, from us here in Tel Aviv, goodbye.